Hi folks, welcome to our series of revision videos. I'm going to be talking about types of cell today, and we split cells up into two main types, eukaryotic and prokaryotic. In the eukaryotic cell, we're talking about plant cells and animal cells, and the definition of being eukaryotic is to have a nucleus. The other type of cell is referred to as a prokaryotic cell, and these are bacterial cells. Prokaryotic cells do not have a nucleus. To see cells, we need to use a microscope, but you need to know about two types of microscope: light microscopes, like the ones you've used in school, and electron microscopes, which are far more powerful. When we discuss microscopes, we talk about their magnification, as in how much bigger than real life is the thing you're looking at, and also resolution. Resolution means what is the smallest things you can see with that microscope. So let's recap. Eukaryotic cells are ones which do have a nucleus, and these include plant cells and animal cells. Prokaryotic cells are bacteria. They do not have a nucleus, but they do have genetic information within the cell itself, but not contained within a nucleus. Two types of microscope: light and electron. Electron microscopes have a much finer resolution, they can see smaller things, and a much higher magnification. They can make things much bigger than real life compared to a light microscope. Hi everybody, we're talking about the parts of cells and the jobs that they do. If you look at an animal cell, you can see that it has a cell membrane, cytoplasm, a nucleus, ribosomes, and mitochondria. If you look at a plant cells have all of the same parts as an animal cell, but may have additional parts that include chloroplasts, a large vacuole, and on the outside, a cell wall. Let's look at the jobs of each part of the cell. Cell membranes control what can go in and out of the cell. The cytoplasm is where chemical reactions happen inside a cell. The nucleus controls the cell and contains the genetic information, the chromosomes. Ribosomes are involved in protein synthesis. That means building up proteins out of amino acids. Ribosomes join together amino acids in the correct order to make the correct protein. Mitochondria are responsible for aerobic respiration. Mitochondria are the batteries, the powerhouse of the cell. They release energy from glucose. In plants, chloroplasts are in the green parts of plants, and they contain the green pigment chlorophyll. Chloroplasts are responsible for trapping the energy from the sunlight in order for the plant to carry out photosynthesis. Plant cells have a large, sap-filled vacuole. The fluid inside the vacuole is pushing outwards and maintaining pressure inside the cells so plants can keep their shape. If a plant doesn't have enough water, it will wilt as the water leaves the vacuole. And finally, cell walls in plants are made of cellulose, and they are responsible for keeping the plant rigid and strong. Remember, cell walls are on the outside. Okay, hi everybody, it's our third revision video in the biology playlist for your mock exam, and just a quick recap before we talk about photosynthesis about plant cells. As you can see, a typical drawing of a plant cell on the screen. Make sure that you are able to label all of those parts that are shown on the screen there and know their jobs. Particularly important in this video is going to be the role of the chloroplast in trapping the sunlight's energy in order to provide the energy for the process of photosynthesis. Obviously, the reactants for photosynthesis have got to get into the cell and diffuse through the cell membrane, and we'll be talking about that later on. Okay, so here we've got a diagram that's summing up the process of photosynthesis. You can see that carbon dioxide and water have to enter the leaf. Light energy and chlorophyll are required in order for the process of photosynthesis to happen, and the products of photosynthesis are glucose and oxygen. Now, glucose is a sugar, and we can also say that it's a carbohydrate. It's made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and those atoms have been provided from the CO2 and H2O. Oxygen is a waste product which goes off into the atmosphere when there's plenty of light energy available. You absolutely must memorize the equation for photosynthesis. In words, the reactants, carbon dioxide, reacts with water and makes the products glucose and oxygen. Higher tier students, make sure you've got that balanced symbol equation. Notice that there's 6 of everything apart from the glucose, and the glucose molecule is made up of the same number of carbon and oxygen atoms and double that number of hydrogen. This is typical for a sugar. We don't include light or chlorophyll in the equation. They are required, but they are not substances, so not participating in the reaction. Photosynthesis is affected by 3 factors that you need to know about: light intensity, carbon dioxide concentration, and temperature. And you can see on these graphs the shape of the graph for the effect of those factors on photosynthesis. Notice that both light and CO2 level out, whereas the temperature graph falls after an optimum temperature. And that is to do with the enzymes being denatured at higher temperatures, and so temperature has a special shape graph. Finally, on this graph, you've got a summary of temperature, light, and carbon dioxide concentration. In the exam, you would need to decide which experiment you would compare to tell you about the effect of each factor. So you can see in experiment 1 and experiment 3 that the temperature is constant at 25 degrees C, so therefore is a control variable, and the CO2 concentration is higher in experiment 3 than it is in experiment 1. These lines are showing us the effect of increasing CO2. Experiment 1 and 2 apply the same logic. CO2 is controlled, the temperature is different. Experiment 1 shows the effect of an increased temperature on photosynthesis. All 3 lines are an upward slope, which eventually levels out to become flat. On each line, when the line becomes horizontal, that tells us that something other than the light intensity is limiting photosynthesis. So in all of the lines, if they're sloping upwards, that tells us that the thing on the bottom axis, in this case light intensity, is the limiting factor. And all of the lines level out. At the point that they level out, something else is limiting photosynthesis other than light intensity. So for example, in experiment 3, at the point where it's become horizontal, we could increase the rate of photosynthesis further only by increasing the temperature or increasing the CO2 percentage. Hey folks, we're learning about respiration. Let's take a moment to just recap the contents of this typical animal cell here before we get going. So remember, when you're labelling an animal cell, it only has a cell membrane around the outside that controls what goes in and out. The filling of the cell, the red part on this diagram, is the cytoplasm, and that's where chemical reactions happen. The big blue blob is the nucleus that controls the cell activities and contains genetic information, and the star of today's show about respiration, the mitochondria, in my diagram here, are represented by these purple dots. Okay, so a good way of remembering the respiration equation is that it's the exact opposite of the photosynthesis equation. So the reactants here going into the cell, you've got glucose and oxygen. Glucose is the fuel, oxygen is required to release the energy from that fuel, and the products of respiration are carbon dioxide and water. The whole point of respiration is to release energy for the cell activities. Okay, make sure you've absolutely nailed this equation and memorized it. Look on the left-hand side of the arrow, the reactants, glucose reacts with oxygen, and on the right side of the arrow, the products are carbon dioxide and water. Now, I put energy on the right-hand side in brackets because for a biologist, that's the point of respiration, but we shouldn't really include that in words because it isn't made of anything, it isn't stuff. Energy is released. This is an exothermic reaction if you're in your chemistry revision. Okay, so it's a good thing to think if a cell needs energy, it's going to have more mitochondria because that's where this aerobic respiration process is taking place. So in the mitochondria, the glucose and oxygen combine, energy is released, and the CO2 and the H2O will have to be removed from the cell. So think of cells that need lots of energy, like muscles, like sperm. They require plenty of mitochondria, so they can do lots of respiration and release all the energy that they need to do their job.
Okay, hi everybody. We're looking at the effect of exercise on your body, and we're linking to that to our big ideas about aerobic respiration. So quick recap, we've got our muscle cell, for example, here, having glucose and oxygen delivered to it, energy being released so the muscle can contract, and carbon dioxide and water being produced, and they will have to be got rid of. Now, anytime we're talking about exercise, we mean how can we respond to deliver the glucose and the oxygen faster to the muscles. The more you exercise, the faster you need to deliver glucose and oxygen, and that means two things. It means your breathing system has to work harder, you breathe faster and deeper to get oxygen into your blood, and your heart needs to work harder to pump that blood around the body quicker. We know when you exercise, your heart rate increases. So exercise causes your body to need to deliver glucose and oxygen quicker to cells because they need it for respiration to provide the energy that they require. Okay, let's look at some of the sorts of graphs we might have to interpret in exam questions related to the effect of exercise on your body. This graph is showing the rate of blood flow with time. So you can see here that the person exercising had a fixed rate of blood flow at time 0, and at 0.5 minutes they began to exercise. Their body was demanding quicker delivery of glucose and oxygen, and so their heart rate increases. Notice that the heart rate, the blood flow, increases steeply at first, and then at a lower and lower rate as it curves until it reaches a maximum level, which is 10 litres per minute, and it reaches that maximum at about 1.5 minutes. This person stopped exercising 2 minutes in, and then you can tell that because the rate of blood flow started to fall and go back to normal. Okay, when we come to explain why your body responds in the way that it does, then we need to be talking about the respiration equation that's happening in the mitochondria in your muscle cells. So an increased cardiac output provides more oxygen and more glucose to the working muscles. This helps because they need to do more aerobic respiration, release more energy, and get rid of carbon dioxide and water, as well as breaking down any lactic acid that is built up. Hopefully this can happen as quickly as possible, and the person will be described as being fitter after the training program compared to before.